Hello. Welcome to the YouTube channel, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I do say that at most of my videos, but today it is true because I'm going to be talking you guys through a lecture that I gave at GameDays this year in October, which hopefully will be fun. I think it got a decent review from the crowd, which was nice. And before I start, I just want to say thank you to the organizers of GameDays for inviting me there. They treated me very nicely. Especially Gabriel and David, who are wonderful people, who are the ones who I think actually invited me there. And yeah, I highly recommend going if you haven't been before. It's in Košice in Slovakia, and it's a really good time. So here are some photos. There's a photo of me in my favorite Urban Outfitters t-shirt, which I like from when I was like 18. I haven't really, emotionally grown up since then. And there's a little photo of like some of the wonderful people who are also talking at the event on the right, including me in the bottom left-hand corner. This is the third time that I'm trying to record this. The first time I didn't hit record, or I think I hit stop recording at some point, so that kind of ruined it. And the second time, somebody barged into my office space and made a big noise, so I stopped recording because it was very distracting. So third time's the charm. We're going to get through this. It's going to be great. And I'm essentially just going to deliver this as if I was actually giving the lecture. Only downside is my throat is a little bit sore now from doing all this talking, but not recording it. So I might have to take some extra breaks for drinking a bit of water here and there, but it should be fine. So anyway, this is what I'm talking about today: systematic creativity, or escalation for concept art. So for those of you who don't know, maybe this is your first time clicking on my YouTube videos, who am I? Well, my name is Daniel. I am a concept artist based in the UK who's been working for about 5 years. And I've worked at companies like ILM, Framestore, and now as a freelancer, worked with a large variety of clients, Paramount, Universal, Disney, blah, 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 across the board. I've worked on shows and films like The Creator, Quiet Place Day One, Napoleon, Pale Blue Eye, Willow, Sandman, Fast and Furious, Doctor Strange, and many, many, many more. I would say up to today, I've probably worked on about 30 plus TV shows and films, all to differing levels of time and quality. But yeah, this is mainly what I do. I've also worked on a bunch of video games, but I can't tell you about them because I signed NDAs. And I've also worked on a bunch of theme parks, but I can't tell you about those either because of NDAs. Can tell you about music videos I've worked on. Very early on in my career, I was doing some music videos for Spotify and for everybody's favorite musical artist, Taylor Swift. I'm also a professional teacher, and this is going to be fairly relevant to what I'm discussing today because a lot of this stuff or the techniques that I'm going to be showing are really based around my learned experiences from teaching other people, both professionals and students, and helping them come up with creative ideas. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how to be creative consistently and show you my methodology for nearly always coming up with a good idea for your concept art project or work. Why? Well, because my job is to be creative every day. At work, I produce ideas and solutions for my clients, and I need to know I will never have an art block day. And more relevant to this lecture, I also need to be able to produce new personal projects as often as possible. Like I said before, I am a freelance concept artist, and one of the most important things that you can do for yourself as a freelancer is to put as much work as possible out on the internet so that people remember you and want to hire you, right? To demonstrate to people that your value as an artist is always improving. So just to show you how seriously I take this, in the last 12 months, here's some of the stuff that I've made. And this is obviously the stuff that I've posted, right? But I did this project Stacks, which is a keyframe world building project. I did this project Dust Races, which was a personal project which was spawned out of a class I taught at New Edge. I did some architectural explorations. I did these in conjunction with Tyler Edlin's CGMA course, who, by the way, Tyler Edlin also has a very good YouTube channel that I recommend you check out. Deity Labs, this was an environmental personal project covering kind of like keyframes and world building of this, weird laboratory. Zakar, an environmental personal project. I found out from an Indonesian friend that Zakar apparently means ballsack. So very unfortunate choice in naming, but I'm too lazy to change it. Biogen, this was a keyframe personal project. There were a lot more keyframes and pieces of development work for this, but I decided to can them because people seemed too weirded out by a robot with a baby, and the other stuff was definitely weirder. So I was like, all right, I'm going to cut my losses and just show the keyframe I finished. Grad, this was another environment personal project using some keyframes and some kind of like design work. This is War of the Worlds. This was something that I produced as part of a lecture that I gave at a Visual Effects Society talk. And Super Omnia, this is my current like world building personal IP that I'm trying to work on. So how can I produce so much? I would say for a professional artist who's often working on multiple projects at once professionally, that's quite a lot of work to be making in my own time. After all of the work that I just showed you guys is personal work. This is artwork that I made outside of the stuff that I produce for clients every single day. Most artists burn a lot of time just trying to find their next idea. And this is why I think a lot of other people out there don't manage to get so much personal work done. But through utilizing the process that I'm going to show you, I think you'll be able to find your next idea far faster and more consistently. I am able to focus on the making of projects because I've already done all of the thinking. And speed, in my opinion, comes from the rate at which you can make decisions, not how fast you can just move your hand or pencil. So today I'm going to show you how I came up with the brief behind this project. So this is Trifer Arena. I'm sorry it's a little bit low res. If you want to see the high res version, it's on my ArtStation. But this is another piece of personal work that's part of my Super Omnia world building project. And I'm essentially going to demonstrate to you guys how I came up with the idea behind this, not so much the technical process of making it. So some sketches and then this. Anyway, have you guys seen Indiana Jones? That's a pretty damn good movie. One of my favorites actually, specifically Temple of Doom. I absolutely love it, even if it is a little bit dated in some ways. But it is an awesome, awesome film, and it is one of Spielberg's best examples of how he does action in films. Really recommend you give it a watch if you haven't. Now, this will relate back to concept art, so, you know, hold on for a second. But just while I've got you here, let's talk about this action scene at the end of the movie. So, Short Round and our heroine, I think her name is Winnie or something, I can't quite remember. I made the mistake of not looking it up before I sat down to record this, and I'm not going to do it. So, Short Round and our heroine, right at the end of the film, are running away from the bad guys, and they get to this ginormous bridge that looks very rickety, and it's like 100 feet up in the air. Our heroine gets very scared, and she starts to run away, and she says, I'm not going across that. And Short Round, to assuage her fears, runs out into the middle of it, jumps, and then immediately falls straight through, proving just how breakable this bridge is. And as he looks down between his legs, we see these little black dots swimming in the water, and what are they? They're crocodiles snapping away. Now, what makes this so awesome is how quickly Spielberg establishes all the different layers of interest and danger in this moment of the movie. So not only is the bridge 100 feet up with a massive drop that would kill most people, not only could the bridge break at any second, but there are also alligators that kill you even if you were to survive that drop. So we've got all of these different layers of danger and action happening in this scene. Once Indy gets to the bridge and his two friends are nearly across, well, what happens? As they get to the other side, oh no, they get kidnapped because the bad guys somehow teleported to the other side. And right as Indy gets to the middle and sees this, what's happening behind him? Well, his escape route is cut off as more bad guys come up and start to chase him down. So his two friends are taken hostage and are thrown out onto the center of the bridge at knife point. And suddenly Indiana is completely surrounded with his friends in danger and nowhere to go. So what do you do when this is, you know, where you found yourself in life? It's very easy. You cut the bridge in half and you make it more dangerous for everybody. And of course, then Indiana is 100 foot up on a bridge that's now not even a bridge. It's more of some kind of broken stepladder that again could break at any second. He still has bad guys above him, still has bad guys below him. His friends are still in danger, and there's still a bunch of alligators hungrily snapping away at the bottom in the water. And once he gets up a little bit further, he starts to fight the bad guy. This dude tries to rip out his heart, and even once he beats that guy, a bunch of archers show up and they start shooting at him. Poor Indy just can't catch a break. But the thing that makes this really amazing, in my opinion, is all of the action beats that happen. What you have to remember is that this scene is functionally a chase or hostage scene. And you have seen this in so many other films. The thing is that in most films, it's totally forgettable because it happens in a car park or in a school or in an office. And nothing really exciting happens, right? The bad guy takes the good guy's friends hostage. They talk a bit, and then the good guy shoots him, or the bad guy gives up or whatever, and everybody's saved, and that's the end. But in this thing, there are all these layers of interest and danger and different moments that could snap back into priority at really any second, right? The bridge could break at any second. The alligators could eat someone at any second. The bad guys could attack him at any second. And it just adds so many layers of interest to the scene. The way that I think about this is that somebody like Spielberg essentially has the idea that he wants to do a chase sequence, and then he uses these as layers or action beats to get to a much more interesting and memorable final result. He's going from A, which is our chase sequence, to B, which is the final film. And essentially what he's doing is he's escalating the scene. So how does this actually relate to concept art? Water break. So we can use this idea of escalation when producing our own work and developing ideas. Like Spielberg, we can move past obvious outcomes and we can layer ideas on top of each other to create something that is way more memorable than just a standard brief or idea that we might see in concept art, like a castle on a hill or a stick man in the desert. Spielberg layers actions, we are going to layer ideas. So how do we actually escalate things? Well, this is the process, and I hope this will become kind of more opaque as we continue. So first, we have to decide what it is that we are escalating. We need to set a topic. Then, second, we need to find a starting point for each of our cores. I would explain what those are. Third, we need to produce options for our layers that we stack to make that new idea. And fourth, we take our layers and combine them together to produce or escalate a new synthesized idea. So, first of all, what is it that we are escalating? Let's set that topic. It's important to set some level of boundary when we're producing ideas. We need to know what we are aiming for, and I often start with single words like fisherman, village, spear, or truck. The boundary can be as open or as narrow as you like. The simpler the starting point, the more open the results you will probably get will be, the more like potential there is for discovery of something interesting. If you want to narrow it down by specifying, for example, okay, well, I want to design an alien brackets 10,000 years in the future using advanced technology in a spaceship, then you are going to get a much narrower set of results overall. But this might be totally fine for what you want to do. So this is my topic. This is my starting point. Fisherman. Does not need to be more complex than that. So we have done our first step. We have decided what we are escalating and set the topic. Second, let's find a starting point for each of our cores. But Daniel, you ask, what is a core? Well, I'm going to explain it to you. It's a lecture. Come on, have some patience. 99% of ideas, in my opinion, can be broken down into 4 core elements. First of all, the lens or the who. This is the perspective that we see your world through. If we're doing a project about Human Hunter, the lens would probably be that character. However, if we were producing a project about the creature that the man was hunting, then the creature itself would become the lens. A project might have multiple lenses, but most concept art projects only really need one. We're trying to provide a clear POV for the audience, and it might be best to think about this as like the view of the main character. You might want to think about the traits that define this person, their personality, their culture, the history that led them to their point, etc. Next, this is the most obvious one, the location or the where. The location. Where is your project actually taking place? Are we in a lush, humid jungle or an arid desert on the other side of the galaxy? Locations often enormously impact projects. Whatever it is that you're designing will need to be placed somewhere in situ. And if you don't understand or don't know where it's going to be, then your design might feel out of place when you finally put it into a location. For example, if you're designing a truck, right, and you don't think about where you're putting it and then you put it in the Arctic, it might feel really out of place because the truck you've designed might be better suited for an urban landscape, right? So if you want to design something very specific, like something that would, go in the Arctic, you need to think about that beforehand. You may need to think about things like the conditions of the weather, the terrain, whether it's man-made or natural, even the amount of gravity. Next, the process or the how, our third core. So how do things actually get done? The vast majority of things that we design have a how attached to them. And I like to think of this as the functional purpose of whatever it is that I am creating. For example, If a house is built to be lived in, how do we design it to fulfill that purpose? If we design a gun, how does it actually shoot? Does it have a unique mechanism of some kind? If we design a creature, how does it hunt or gather food? What evolutionary kind of incentive does it have? This is where we start to think about things like gear, functional design elements, evolution, or practical elements for realism. Finally, our last core, the reason or the why. Why should I care about your world, your project, or your design? As I'm sure many of you are aware, most people, whether it's on Instagram or ArtStation, don't really give people's work a chance and they just scroll right past it. So we want to give the viewer a reason to actually be there in that moment with you as the author of the work. At the end of the day, if you want somebody to appreciate your village design or your vehicle, it's much easier to do that when you give them a bigger reason to care about it. If you're designing a village, maybe your reason is a ritual sacrifice. If you're designing a truck, maybe the reason is the story of a long, difficult journey that is finally at its end. Most people need something to latch onto, both from a visual and narrative standpoint, so give that to them. Little caveat here, but I think the reason is a little bit different to the previous cause. This is more of an audience-oriented line of questioning, and really we're just asking why the audience should look at your work and what the hook is to keep them engaged. Whilst every question helps elevate the project into something more interesting, this is where you might need to think more, a little bit more about what could be interesting for somebody else rather than what is interesting just for you. So this is how I kind of visualize this in my head. I have my topic and I have my cores that surround them. But there's a little bit more work to do here because every single core needs a defined starting point. So we essentially want to go from A to B with our thinking. The reason that I think this is a very important step is because most people come up with ideas in a very random way. But if we can kind of systematize and make that process a little bit more linear, it becomes way easier. It is far easier to know where you want to go if you know where you are starting. So this starting point will become the A for each of our cores, and we will then do our best to find an interesting B that we reach. Our starting point should be pretty much the most boring point of entry that you can imagine, the most mundane thing in your life. So for a fisherman, my very boring, mundane starting point is going to be a guy like this, a scruffy dude in overalls and boots sitting by the river. Why is this really boring to me? Well, because this is what I saw every week in Oxford. These are all photos from the river in Oxford. And this was such a normal part of my life that there couldn't be a more normal rendition of a fisherman for my personal life experience. For the location, it's going to be that same river I grew up next to, right? A placid river on the fringes of a suburban area. For the process, everybody I saw fishing growing up, and even when I went fishing, we used fishing rods. So again, that's the most normal, mundane starting point. And finally, the reason to eat the fish, right? Which is why most people have been fishing for the length of human history. So we've decided what we're escalating and we've set a topic. And we have found a starting point for each of our cores. So now we need to produce options for our layers that we stack to make the new idea. How do we actually make those layers? Just gonna take a little sip of water. So to produce layers, we need to ask ourselves questions that escalate the concept. We want to ask questions that will have a specifically visual outcome. We don't need layers that explain the full history and lore of every aspect of your idea, just the parts that will actually affect and push the visuals of your final design in some way. So let's begin this process, and I'm sorry if this gets a little bit confusing, with the lens. And just to clarify here, I've got a little pause sign just for everybody's sanity. If this is already feeling too much, at this point in the lecture, I'd recommend you take a 5-minute break, get yourself a cup of tea, and then come back. Because honestly, the amount of words is about to escalate, not de-escalate. That's why the lecture is called Escalation. It's just escalating amounts of words and 0 pictures. But it is a writing theory class, so I'm not really, not too many pictures are available for that. Anyway, let's actually crack on with this. Let's begin with the lens. So these are the kind of questions I'm going to start asking myself so I can get from A to B. Do the proportions or anatomy differ from the average fisherman's? Could they be an alien? Could they be genetically enhanced? Could they be camouflaged? What is their personality like? Could they be enhanced? Well, if they are, maybe they have really strong arms to help them reel in the line. Maybe they have polarized eyes so they can see fish under the water. Maybe they have the ability to produce their own fishing line, like a spider's web. Or maybe they have really long arms or fingers so they can noodle with their hands. For those of you that don't know, that's where you catch a fish with your hands. It's called noodling, strange name. What is their personality like? Well, this might seem like a strange thing to cover, but if a character has a very strong personality that's going to be shown in the project, it might be a really important thing to cover, right? So maybe they hunt the fish for pleasure, or maybe they do it for work. If it's for work, they're going to be wearing work clothes and they're probably going to be a little bit worn down. If it's for pleasure, maybe the kind of stuff that they wear in their presentation is a lot more spicky. Or spick and span. I don't know if that's the right word. Anyway, whatever. Do they hate the fish like the guy from Moby Dick? If so, maybe they need to look mega angry and just pissed the whole kind of like throughout all of your imagery. Maybe they love the fish and they're trying to save them or, from some kind of ecological spill. Maybe they're really engaged with their culture and so they have loads of like cultural symbols all over their clothing and gear. Let's talk about the location. Is it a calm and peaceful or dangerous and violent place? Is it urban or designed? Is it public or private? Maybe there are environmental factors our character might need to compete with in this location. Let's talk about those environmental factors. Maybe it rains all day long. Maybe it is extremely hot or cold. Maybe we're in an environment that might produce very volatile reactions like earthquakes, eruptions, or an irradiated lake. Maybe the air isn't even breathable, or maybe there's a different level of gravity, like 0G. Is it an urban or is it a design space? Well, it could be an urban lake where hobbyists can practice on robot fish. Maybe it's a space built specifically for competitive sport. Maybe it is a zoo or conservatory that our character broke into because they're an asshole. Or maybe it's the one natural space on a spaceship as it travels from one end of the galaxy to another. Let's talk about the process. So again, we're trying to get away from this idea of the fishing rod to make it more interesting, right? So is it high tech or low tech? Do they have non-traditional tools to help them catch the fish? Is the gear really big or small, like a rod versus a full-size crane? Is it custom made or mass produced? How was the gear even acquired? So if they have non-traditional tools, things that aren't fishing rods, what could they have? Well, maybe they have a hunter-killer style tackle that seeks fish. Maybe they have a dynamite kit to stun them. Maybe they have a drone that monitors the position of the fish in the water. Or maybe they have boots that let them walk on water. How was that gear acquired? Well, maybe it was purchased at a specialist shop, so it's all really beautifully made and like put together in a gorgeous way. Maybe it was stolen from a high-tech lab, so it's kind of damaged, or they've had to repair a section of it because, they broke it on the way out. Or maybe it's a family heirloom that's been handed down through the generations. Finally, let's talk about the reason. Does our character need the fish, right? Is it a thing that they're doing? Again, this kind of comes back to the idea of like, is it for enjoyment or for necessity? But again, this would be reflected in the design of your character or your project. Is it a matter of sport? Is it a matter of pride? Is it for a ceremony of some kind? Is there a unique resource that they can take from capturing this animal? Well, if it's a matter of sport, maybe our fisherman's competing in a very high-level contest like the PGA Fishing Tour. Maybe they're competing in a variation of a sport that we understand or know in the real world, like water polo. Maybe they're competing under coercion, like slaves in the Roman Colosseum. Or maybe the sport is so dangerous that they need to have protection, which goes back into our gear section. If it's for a ceremony, maybe it's for a sacrifice. They need to go and sacrifice this fish to the cat gods for a good harvest. Maybe it is, for a coming of age ritual of some kind. Maybe it's a religious thing, or maybe it's based on public law. Like there's some legal reason that this person has to capture a fish. Maybe it's a new ceremony and this is the first time that we're seeing somebody do it. Or maybe it's something that's been happening for thousands of years. Once you've made all these choices, you're going to have something that looks like this. And this is kind of how I think about it. It's like almost like data points, right? So it's essentially a mind map where we are linearly expanding from that central basic point of the fisherman, our topic. So once you have this, and I'm going to mention this again later, but it's really important to understand that you literally have thousands of options at your fingertips. If you were to choose one option from each of those orange sections, you would have like over 50,000 potential combinations, I believe. And the thing is, you're going to find a combination of these answers and questions and ideas that you will like. And the great thing about having all of this information at your fingertips is that not only can you potentially plan your next project, but it might inspire you to have an idea for the one after that and the one after that, which is awesome. Because again, there's just such an insane amount of data here and such a crazy amount of ways to combine all that data together that it's almost inevitable that you will find something cool or appealing by doing this process. So we've decided on what we're escalating and set the topic. We found our starting point for each of our cores, and we have produced options for our layers that we've stacked to kind of like try and make our new idea. But how do we actually take those layers and combine them together? Well, I kind of think this is probably the simplest step, because like we said at the start, we just want to make depth in our briefs by layering ideas on top of each other and combining them in an unforgettable way, just like Spielberg does with his action scenes. So we now have all of our layers, and it's pretty much just a matter of finding cool combinations. You've got thousands of options, like I said. So take your base idea and see how far you can push it. We are trying to go from A to B, from normal to exciting. So let's turn this into a real brief. These are the options that I chose. So I've decided that I want to do a brief that is centered around the idea of different levels of gravity in a space built specifically for competitive sport, with our fishermen competing in a high-level contest, an equipment that was purchased at a specialist shop, some equipment which includes boots that let him walk on water, and polarized eyes so they can see the fish under the water. Now, it's important as we go here, because you'll see as I click on the next section, that not all of those ideas are included. I kind of removed the idea of the polarized eyes because I didn't think it fit with the idea. And what I really want to stress is that this is a starting point. This is for personal work, right? And at the end of the day, personal work is meant to be something that represents your ideas to the best of your ability and essentially shows clients if you have cool ideas or can execute on them well. So if you go through this process and you find a combination of things like this and it inspires a different idea, that is also totally fine, I think, as long as you're still retaining the same levels of depth to what you're doing. This is just a way to get started and to have an idea to begin with. If you want to move past that, that is totally fine. I'm not going to hold it against you. But other than this, what you're really trying to do is just create the glue that brings all of these ideas together. Because right now, if I just kind of going back and forth here, these are all ideas that you can maybe start to imagine how they could be combined, but we are now trying to produce the specific way that they will be combined, right? And that is where the brief writing comes into hand. So I'm just going to read through my little brief I wrote here. So located in the pirate city of Supra, the advanced fishing arena stands, a competitive version of asteroid fishing. The crews compete in timed games to catch as many of their slippery prey as possible to beat the other team. To simulate asteroid fishing, the pirates have rigged artificial gravity simulators in the center of the arena. From here, asteroids and water globules are sent up, some of which contain space fish. The competitors then jump between objects utilizing their water walking boots and harpoons to gather their prey before depositing them back at their team's base for points. Although the technology is advanced, it is not necessarily clean or newly manufactured. These are resourceful and scrappy people, and they can make anything work. So this is hopefully a pretty clear brief, and I think it's quite explicit about what I want to design. You could go into this and do loads of work designing the characters. You could spend loads of time designing the props. You could spend loads of time designing the environment. That is up to you, right? Once you've written something like this. And depending on what you want to design, you might want to gear the brief more and more towards that. Because, I'm doing film stuff, what I really want to produce here is like produce a bunch of keyframes for myself and maybe some designs alongside it. So I want to, and I've written this in my assets area, I want to kind of design the arena, the VIP stand, the harpoon gun, and the boots. And for the keyframes, I want to make an establisher of the arena, a shot of the center and the sport taking place, blah, blah, blah. On the right here, you might have noticed that I've got my references. Limiting your references to a small amount, I think, is very important. If you have like 200 references here on the brief, then it becomes very unclear. So try to find references that explain your idea as succinctly as possible. You can have loads and loads of other references somewhere else, but it's important to have like ones that I think eloquently explain the idea as best as you can at that stage over on the right-hand side of the brief. just to make things easier for you and for other people to understand. So this is where I ended up with, which we obviously saw at the start. But again, you can see that like there's definitely things that have changed between this and this. And again, why has that happened? Well, it's because this is personal work. It's for my own IP, and I want to, you know, make sure that it fits my vision as closely as possible. Just because I've written this brief does not mean I am beholden to it. This is obviously not the case, by the way, if you're doing professional work. If you're doing professional work and somebody approves a brief, that is what you're doing. But for personal work, you can change things as you go. I just think that all of this gives you a very strong starting point to get going very quickly. And you might be wondering, well, what does getting going actually look like? For me, it looks like this. So after I wrote my brief, I did some quick sketches to get my idea across to myself. I usually would never show these to people, but you know, it's for education, so it's fine. And then once I've done that, I'll build a 3D model. I might refine that model more. I might change my mind. I might change my mind again, start posing characters, change my mind again, but keep the poses, reuse some of the poses and the assets, but rebuild the whole space so it's more custom, do some notes over it so I know what I want to do next, and very slowly get to the final result, which is where we want to be at the end of the day, right? So with all of that said, you know, we have completed the process at this point. We've decided what our topic was. We've set starting points for our cores. We've produced options or layers, and then we have taken those layers, combined them into an idea, produced a brief, and actually turned that brief into a real piece of artwork. So in conclusion, I'm sorry there weren't more pictures. I know that it's really tough, especially if you're coming from this from an artistic point of view, to listen to somebody exclusively talk about art through writing. But I think this is a really important thing to kind of understand if you want to effectively do your art, because writing is a hell of a lot quicker than drawing everything out every time you have an idea. So essentially, please don't be afraid to do a little bit of writing before you put pen to paper. Art is not always just about drawing and painting. It is a lot of the time about doing other preparatory work to help yourself out. Creativity and general work speed don't come from the speed at which you can draw. It comes from the speed at which you can think. So the more you practice creative processes like this one, the easier it will come to you naturally, and the more ideas will naturally come to you in an organic way. And just to clarify here as well, this is not the only creative process that's ever been written down. There are many, many other good ones, a lot of them which I've based this theory on as well. So do whatever works for you to help you come up with the good ideas. I just recommend trying as much writing really as possible when it comes to this stuff, because the more efficiently you can write, the more efficiently you can think, and the more efficiently you'll be able to get to the art, because the idea section of stuff will already be sorted out. In the actual lecture, I shilled the YouTube channel, and I guess since you're on the YouTube channel right now listening to this video, I will shill it here as well. If you like the videos, please give it a subscribe, it really helps. Please like this video and go check out some of the other ones. I really recommend the Making of Diamond Sky, Deity, and Zakar videos, mainly because they cover the actual building process of projects, which I'm not covering in this video. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was useful. I hope it kind of like opened your eyes up to some different ways of being creative. And if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I think this is probably the last video for the year, but let's see. Either way, thank you so much. Bye.